Welcome to Recalibrate Reality, the future of New York. Our guest today is James Phillips, the president of the Digital Transformation Platform Group at Microsoft. James leads a 15,000 person team focused on the digital transformation of just about anything you could possibly imagine. In this episode, James and I discuss how advances in technology will completely change how we live, work, and operate in a post-COVID world. And so now, let's recalibrate reality with James Phillips. James, welcome to Recalibrate Reality.
Thank you very much, Scott. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. And so you're now president of the digital transformations for Microsoft, which is a new role that consolidates a number of different departments within Microsoft to really position Microsoft to lead the way and use all its resources as effectively as possible on this digital transformation. Maybe you could take a second and just talk about that role and how you're sort of organizing it and what the opportunity is.
Sure. And I think after I describe the role, we'll get into sort of the why and what that role permits in the world. But it really was an attempt to bring together at Microsoft a number of what were previously discrete teams, sort of starting at the bottom with data, all of our technologies that allow you to bring data together, to hold it and to process it. On top of that, our artificial intelligence technologies that once you have that data, the ability to reason over it and predict and learn. And then on top of that, our application platform and our application families that take those predictions, those insights, and allow you to then go do something with them, specifically, modifying business processes and how you engage your customers or how you operate a building. And so pulling together sort of this top to bottom stack that starts from data and works its way up toward the applications.
Right now, and actually, when I was in Microsoft's headquarters before COVID, and I had the opportunity to go to their experience center, and I was completely blown away by the advances in cloud computing as AI and the acceleration of all this digital transformation of everything. And really, to your point about taking data and making it actionable to change processes, to make for richer lives, to make people more efficient and more productive. But I felt like I was in a sci-fi movie. I mean, it was really, until I actually went there, it was hard to really conceptualize when people talk about the future of cloud computing and how impactful it could be to society. So I thought it would be helpful if maybe you could take a few minutes and describe for our audience who really hasn't had that opportunity to see it, sort of, what cloud computing is and what the potential is in terms of how people live and they work and they operate in the future.
Sure. So that, technology and the way that we've used technology, computers in business, I would argue it really hasn't changed fundamentally in decades. From the beginning, when we started using computers, we were, for all practical purposes, sort of computerizing the processes we'd always had. If I go back to 1950 and you look at the way I was engaging with my customers, I had filing cabinets and paper and I'd take notes and I'd file it. And we really just sort of took that process and took the files and the paper away, but stored the files and the notes in computers. And we've been that way for decades. Very reactive. We wait for our customers to call us. We answer the phone, we take notes in an application, we store it off. It's kind of the computerization, the encapsulation of processes that we've always had. Now there's a fundamental shift occurring. So there's something changing now that is core and really different, permits a different way of engaging our customers, operating our businesses, working, engaging with each other. And that shift, Scott, is that data is now starting to come out of everything. Data is coming out of all the products, all the services, social media, everything is a rich pool of potential insight. And that turns the world upside down. If you're able to gather all of that data, gather all of that signal and reason over it, you can predict that, I have certain temperature preferences. You can predict that I may be driving somewhere and give me navigational aids before I even have to type the address in. You can predict that I'm in a new job. And if you were selling to me, you should get a text message and let you know that I've changed jobs. This very sort of predictive, proactive approach across all of business is a turning upside down in almost every way every business process, from asset management to managing your supply chain to engaging your customers to operating your facilities.
And it sounds, and from like again touring that experience center, that it's going to be ubiquitous, right? With every sector, every industry, every way of life, you're going to have be impacted. I think maybe from a consumer's perspective, probably to think about your phone. If you're on your iPhone now, all of a sudden, it will pop up to suggest what app you would want to open, because you normally, when you're in that location at that hour, you may be typing in notes or you might be setting your alarm. That would be every way of life, right? That's an example of what you're referring to in terms of predicting and nudging forward.
But that kind of personalized engagement, the ability to deliver just what I need right when I need it, in a very predictive, proactive way is very different than the world that we grew up in.
And I remember when I was walking through there, feeling and talking to your team about how still early stage, how nascent this still is in development. And at the time, one of your the team members made the point to me that we're still in the maybe the second or third inning of this. And I'm curious, particularly with how COVID was this accelerant, right? That took the 10 years worth of innovation, as I think Satya Nadella said, and pushed it into 10 months. Do you think we're still in that early inning to the third inning? Where do you think we are in terms of this advances in this digital transformation and cloud computing?
10 years ago, we were still giving away $1 million prizes to people who could go into a parking lot in Palo Alto, California and navigate cones. And today, I am on a public highway being driven to the office by my car. I mean, it's mind-boggling how quickly this sort of pace of change is proceeding and accelerating. So I'll be honest, 10 years ago, I would not have predicted that today I would be sitting in a car that was driving me into the office. And yet here we are. And so I say all of that to say that, you know what? I don't know. I think we're early. I think where we're going, we can only begin to imagine. I think that the innings continue to get stretched. I think we find ourselves in the ninth inning and suddenly we end up in a tie and we keep going. And so I don't know where we are in this journey. I do know that it's early. I do know that what we're now seeing happen with mixed reality and the ability, for example, with something like Microsoft HoloLens, to wear these glasses that can project out in front of you holograms onto the world, that have sensors, they're cameras in the HoloLens, so it can see the world, process the world, and then project back onto the world information that could help all of us be more productive. And for me, I'm terrible with names. I'd be a horrible politician. And so if I was able to wear these glasses and have face recognition and just put the person's name right over their head as I'm talking to them, it would be a game changer for me, just in relationships, and take away some social fear I have, right? So I don't know where we're going to end up. It's an exciting journey. It's a journey that is filled with risk, if we're being honest, right? Some of these technologies, we don't quite yet understand how we're going to have to grapple with the social impact of some of these technologies. But I do know that used correctly, they can really change our lives, change our relationships, change the way that we engage with each other, and change the way we do business.
Right. But it's interesting because what I will say is that I was in Microsoft campus, I think it was March 6th, and I was escorted out with the Sam Jordan, some of your other colleagues, as they were closing down the campus because of COVID, and we were there talking about the digital transformation of the workplace and this long strategy. And then when COVID hit, all of a sudden, all of our energy and focus with ourselves, our digital lab, and your team went to thinking about what is the digital solutions that we could provide to reopen our office buildings so that the people were safe, felt safe, had ability to change behaviors, to social distance, wear face masks, have compliance, have transparency, the health and wellness of the buildings, virtual care. And literally, you saw in a 90-day period, the amount of work that was done and innovation that was adopted by our firm and all of the stakeholders that were in that and rolled out through our portfolio, what we called from March to Memorial Day, the March to Memorial Day, was extraordinary. And I got to imagine that happened, in company after company after company. where things that were nice to have, projects that were on the back burner because of technology, became a need to have projects, because the only way to actually engage safely and coexist with COVID was you needed to use technology to either communicate or to put in protocols or whatever else there might be. And so have you seen that with a number of your other clients at Microsoft?
For sure. I think that, there are two things that happen. So thing number one, there was a real need for technology and the ability to use technology to navigate the crisis. And thing number two was the need for expediency and agility in doing that, right? Both those things came into play. And as you sort of, intimated, these have been things that we've all been working on for some time, but in time of crisis, it became urgent. And, just to give you one example, around the same time, late March of last year, we got a call from a hospital system that needed urgently to be able to track the number of beds they had available in their emergency room facilities and in the hospital more generally, the need to track personal protective equipment, just systems that they didn't really have available, and they needed it not next month or a year from, like right now. We were able in 7 days to leverage this sort of low code platform that we have called the Power Platform to build this solution. And then within 10 days total running time, we had deployed this solution out to literally thousands of hospitals across the United States where they were able to use this. And it's because of cloud computing. In the past, you go back 10 years, you would have needed IT organizations and all these hospitals to get software and install it on computers and make it available on PCs. And it would have been a really, really difficult logistical problem. But with cloud computing, we operate that system now on behalf of the customers, and anyone can access it as long as they have credentials and can log in through their browser. And everyone's got a browser on their phone or tablet or on a computer. And so it really, this acceleration, the 10 months to, 10 years to 10 months of acceleration that Satya talked about, it was a two-pronged deal. It was both the technology that makes it possible to do things like facially recognize that someone's wearing a mask or not when they walk into a facility, and cloud computing and the agility and the sort of the velocity of being able to adopt it that sort of came together in order to make this possible.
Right. And I guess the third thing you'd add to that was the need, so that the willingness for people to adopt something that in the past they may not have adopted as quickly as they had in this instance.
Vitamins became pain relief.
Right, exactly. I like that. Vitamins became pain relief. That's good. So I want to shift to the future of work and the workplace for a minute. And I think that as you think about what happened, right? A lot of technologies were developed because people had to disengage physically, but had to remain engaged in some form. And as you pointed out, Teams had played a great role in doing that, as well as a lot of other technologies as we go forward. As now people are returning to the workplace, and the sort of the future of the workplace. When I speak to companies, you hear as they think about what that workplace is going to be different than what it was before. And I think it's going to be taking the best of what the workplace was in terms of social interaction, in terms of team building, community building, experiences when you're in work, but also recognizing now that the genie's out of the bottle with respect to technology that enables you to work remotely. So how do you get that right life-work balance along the way? And I'm curious, as you at Microsoft have thought about the workplace of the future and hybrid work in general, what you've been thinking about for Microsoft and what you're hearing your clients are doing, and some technologies that you think are going to be important in that environment.
So Microsoft Teams, of course, which is our sort of flagship product for bringing teams together to collaborate, to communicate, to create, to work together, and to do it regardless of where you happen to physically be sitting. I'd go back to what we described earlier, this 10 years to 10 months thing. I think the pandemic, in addition to accelerating the use of technology in general, it did accelerate what was already a bubbling trend around being able to work from wherever it makes the most sense for you and for your family. And also on the other side, for businesses and governments to be able to employ the best talent regardless of where they're sitting, right? It's sort of a dual-sided benefit. We believe very strongly that was already sort of underway.
Yeah.
And the pandemic simply accelerated that. And in many ways, I think cemented it by forcing us. We didn't have a choice, right? We had to find a way to work together when we couldn't be physically together. And that in and of itself allowed people to get comfortable with that modality of working and engaging. And so that's a huge accelerative force, I think. And we have the tools for it. I'll tell you, one of the things that we're trying to do at Microsoft, obviously we're a global company. We've got employees all over the planet in every country. And yet, my team continues to be a bit Redmond centric, Seattle centric. It's sort of where our headquarters is. And if I'm living in Prague or I'm living in, India, the experience that I have pre-pandemic was typically that I had a bunch of folks in a conference room in Seattle that were all engaging, physically present, and I was on a call as perhaps 1, 2, or 3 people in what was a larger meeting. What we've had to do over the last year and a half now is to all be on exactly the same playing field. We were all on the call. We were all on video. We were all engaging as first-class participants, if you will, in these dialogues. And it was eye-opening. It was eye-opening for the folks who had previously been in the room. And it was certainly eye-opening and certainly welcome for the folks who were previously not in the room. And one of the things that we've decided to do, just my leadership team, we've made a choice that every single meeting that we do, my leadership team is going to be run through Teams going forward. Even if we're in the office, we are going to sit in our office and dial into the meeting versus coming together in a conference room. We're still, even in Seattle, we're across multiple campuses and buildings. And so we had to have time to get together. So we're going to give it a go, even after the pandemic, in trying to maintain this level playing field where folks who are on the team who aren't present and can't be in the room have precisely the same experience that we have. And we'll see how that goes. I mean, I think we're entering a period of experimentation, of learning. But we don't want to lose the goodness that we've had, which is, really bringing us together, paradoxically, when we couldn't be brought together. And so I do think that's one dimension of the change that we're going to see. And I think we'll work out how it goes long term.
Yeah, no, and I could see that. And I think that's been, it does level the playing field relative to people who can't be in the office, whether that's because it's geography or, health issues or personal issues that enables them to elevate. I think that is a little bit of the type of balance that I was speaking about. And I think this is another area where, again, when you start thinking about technology and the IoT and AI approach to things, for the first time, can give companies transparency as to what's actually happening physically in the workplace, right? I mean, they know what you have the tools at Microsoft. I know I get little reports about how much time I'm spending focus time, how many meetings I'm collaborating with people. But online you have it, but offline you don't have it. So you don't know if you're in the workplace and you're hoping that people are there collaborating with their colleagues. How much time are they spending collaborating with those colleagues? How much time are they going to the program you wanted them to go to? Are they using the amenities that they want them to use, or are they in their office on Teams calls or video conference calls when you really want them engaged? And I think the key for the workplace is it creates that sense of community and bond, and that you'd lose if you're not together. And I think that companies are going to really have to work hard and be intentional, as you were just describing, even on your Teams concept, but be intentional about developing workplace processes, monitoring and having transparency through technologies to what's really happening, and then adjusting as they see things settle down to find that right balance and create something as productive as possible.
I think that's exactly right. And I think, it's interesting in some ways. So we have an offering that we built at Microsoft in my organization called Connected Store. And it allows our retail partners to have cameras in their retail facilities where they can literally watch the movement of customers throughout the store, understand dwell time in front of an end cap, and it provides you with real insight into what's happening in the space, not just in general, but even specifically, including things like, I'm out of product on that shelf. I need to get someone to come, put the product in. And so this use of technology to effectively, digitize what previously was physical to match what we see online, right? If I'm shopping on Amazon.com, it's all digital. And so it's easy to observe. If we're having a Teams meeting, it's all digital. It's easy to observe. But to your point, the real physical world has been less easy to make sense of. And that is the next frontier.
Yeah, and James, you're spot on when you talk about customer research. And that's an area when we speak to our clients, we're frequently making the comparison of how much money they spend in understanding how their customers shop, retaining those customers, building customer loyalties, what else they're shopping for, where they shop, on what shelf, all the things that you described, all that data. And when you look at the math, they spend 10 times as much on that as they spend on understanding those same points related to their employees. And so really the analogy is, and this is what's interesting for us, is we move from talking to the people in charge of real estate to chief of human capital, because it's about how do we research what's working for our team members so that they feel empowered, they feel productive, they're getting the most of the workplace, they're getting the right quality of life work balance. But you need data to do that. You need to give them tools to help them change behaviors. Which was the best way to commute? You've done it this way all week. If you changed it to that, what would have been? You wanted to see these people in the office, but you were in the office 3 days and you didn't see them, or you saw them X% of the time, right? It's the same thing as on the retail analogy that you use. It just brings it to the workplace. And, and I think it's a key. And even if you look at loyalty, I don't think there's any surprise that we've seen record levels of people quitting their jobs and relocating someplace else, because we've just gone through a year where you haven't been able to have that loyalty. You haven't been able to have that level of engagement. So if you're not engaging personally and feeling you're part of something bigger, part of a community, then you're a free agent, and a free agent's for sale, right? Versus someone that feels they're part of something. And so that's why I think the workplace really needs to be highly curated on a going forward basis, and the same level of investment that you would make for your customers, you need to make for your employees.
Makes a ton of sense. And I do think, honestly, we could go too far with the whole digital thing, right? I mean, to your point, what we don't want to do is make the world a bunch of free agents that have no social connection. I think that would be tragic for humanity. And I think it'd be tragic for business. And so it's how do you get that balance right? How do you use technology for what it's good for, to empower and to sort of help individuals achieve more ultimately, but do it in a way that doesn't remove the human connection. And I think getting that balance right, we've kind of gone from a world where we had no restrictions to the last year and a half where we had a lot of restrictions on our ability to be socially together. It will be fascinating to watch the trajectory coming out of the other side of this. And I think if anyone says they can predict precisely what it's going to look like, you need to be skeptical, because I think we're all in for a lot of learning.
Right, now that makes sense. And with this acceleration, I'm curious, it's like innovation's taking place so quickly that standing still is moving backwards. And companies like RXR is investing, big Fortune 500, the S&Ps they're investing, they have the capital to turn to the Microsofts of the world and others. How do smaller companies that don't have that capacity, how do they digitize their businesses so they can maintain that level of competitive and still compete, against those larger companies?
So I think, two things have happened. Thing number one, if you think about the cloud computing thing I was talking about earlier, the story that I told about the hospital system that was able to roll out, small businesses traditionally, they don't have large IT organizations. They're not deep in technology. They're great at running their business. And frankly, in the past, it's been a bit of a barrier to adopt technology, because in the past you had to get software and manage computers and hook them up and, administer the systems. And it was a complicated task that, some were able to navigate, but not all. Today, technology and software and the ability to use software and technology to help run a business more effectively it shows up in your browser, right? It's just like going to Facebook, except you go to a business system, and that makes it incredibly accessible. And so this sort of software as a service, as it's called, versus sending you software that you need to operate, I'll deliver the value via your browser or your phone or whatever device you're using. That's a huge, huge democratization of the ability to access, lowers a lot of barriers to adoption. I think the other thing that's happened, and this has been going on now for, a good solid decade and a half at least, is the sort of the globalization, or at minimum the nationalization of markets. It used to be the case that, as a small business, you served a local community, and you can still do that and still make a great living and be an important part of a community. But at the same time, with FedEx and UPS and the internet and the ability to go make markets wherever they are has been a game changer for many small businesses. I grew up in Louisiana, and we do crawfish boils down there. And when I moved up to Seattle, I really missed it. But you know what? I can get crawfish overnight from a crawfish farm in Louisiana by going to their website, ordering, and it shows up the next day on FedEx. I mean, it's amazing now that small business in sort of the heart of Cajun country can serve not just me in Seattle, but literally anyone on the planet. And so you marry those two things, sort of the accessibility, the lower barriers to tech, and the ability to communicate and to deliver anywhere on the globe. And I think it's a transformative opportunity for small business. And in many ways, put small business now on the level of what was only available to large multinational enterprises, both from a reach of markets perspective and an access to technology perspective.
Right, and so probably something else that was accelerated with COVID as well, because they had no choice and consumers were shopping more online, and they would find that whatever that product that was. What about with the recent cyber attacks with SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline? Do you think that occurring is going to slow down the momentum that we've seen in terms of the digital transformation of so many industries, feeling that maybe now it makes us susceptible to attack from bad actors?
I don't think you can slow it down. I think the genie's out of the bottle on the benefits of technology. I don't think we could do anything to stop the growth in the pervasive use of technology to improve how we interact with each other, how we connect with each other, how we connect with our customers, how we operate. I mean, it's the benefits are too great. And so the question is, how do you manage the risk associated with that? And, this is an area where Microsoft, just to sort of talk a bit parochially about what we're doing, has invested a massive, massive amount of capital to ensure that, security, in addition to privacy, are sort of job one. And if you look at our ability, and in fact, if you look at, where these breaches have happened, even where it's not a Microsoft customer not using our technology, Microsoft is frequently there alongside even the federal government to help understand, to mitigate, and to understand so that in the future, those same kinds of risks are avoided. So I think, I don't think we can go back. I don't think that we're going to see a bending of the curve down on the adoption. I do think it's a reasonable question to ask, where are the risk vectors? How can we mitigate those? How can we come together to ensure that these are secure systems and connections that we're making with each other? But I don't think it's going away.
Yeah. And I guess the concept of describing before, sort of the cloud computing approach, software as a service, means that it's the big boys like Microsoft can invest the money to provide some of those protections versus each individual trying to do it themselves, which almost is impossible.
Exactly. It's fascinating, actually, Scott. If you look at the conversations that were happening 5 or so years ago, when I would talk with a large enterprise about their computing strategy and technology strategy, frequently the question was, am I safe going to the cloud? Because I'm not in control. Now the conversation's, how fast can we get there?
Right.
Because we know that we don't have thousands of people who spend their entire day red teaming, trying to attack the infrastructure and understanding where the threats and risks are so the gaps are being closed, where there are systems that can monitor on a global basis emergent threats, where they can be clamped down on and then applied immediately upon detection, globally. And so this ability for us to see globally, to identify emergent threats and then to deal with them very quickly and to do it globally it's a game changer, frankly, for the security of these systems, and certainly not something that any company, I would argue, can sort of match unless you're in this sort of public cloud business.
Interesting. So I want to, on our final question, I want to come back to New York, some of the impacts in New York a little bit, which is when you think about digital transformation and the adoption of technology, and if you looked at a list of the major industries and who's leading, who's, sort of the end of that list, the end of the list typically would be, government, healthcare, and real estate in some order. And in New York, government, healthcare, and real estate makes up a big part of what this city is. We spoke a little bit about real estate. We spoke a little about healthcare. You brought that up. But I want to focus a little bit on government and cities and smart cities. And you think through, in a post-pandemic world and all the technological process and this digital transformation that we're going through, if for a city like New York, from your vantage point, when we think ahead 3, 5 years, 10 years, how can some of these new tools, these new approaches, enable us to have a more sustainable, more equitable, more prosperous, more functioning, productive city?
So there's a lot in that question. I think let me come at it in two directions. I think from a prosperous, efficient, functional city, I think technology. You've done a lot with us on the Internet of Things, IoT, as it's called, where devices can be connected and information can flow through. You think about safety, public safety. You think about the transit system and the ability to learn and to ensure that you are getting the most efficient use of those assets, and more importantly, getting people what they need when they need it, and sort of dialing that in. I think there's a massive opportunity for technology to make the city itself move more smoothly, more cost effectively, and more equitably for all the constituents, all the citizens. I think there's another sort of thing in there that you could pull out, which is, if technology is going to be so important to everything, we need to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be trained, to understand, to get skilled up, to have access to technology, to broadband, to computing. I think both those things must be true. And I think, you've seen a lot in society about the move from big cities, but there's a lot to be said for. There's a reason why cities exist, and frankly, a reason why cities do continue to grow. It's because you can concentrate investment, you can concentrate and share investment across many citizens, and things like, a place where you can go get skilled up. If you've got a lot of people around, you can afford to go make those kinds of investments because the impact is going to be, amortized across a very large population. And so I think cities like New York are in a perfect position to both benefit from and from the sort of making things run more smoothly, but also to sort of educate and bring along the population, because you can afford to make those investments. If you've got 3 people in Iowa that live in 10 square miles of a farm, it's kind of hard to go skill folks up. You can do that when you have 1 million people sitting within an 8-block radius. So I think New York is at the forefront of the opportunity here. And, one of the things that we have seen, in fact, is that, you mentioned healthcare, government, and sort of the real estate markets, which would sort of rule, along with financial services, of course, in New York. We've seen, in fact, incredible growth across all 4 sectors in their use of technology. In fact, we just announced not too long ago that we're acquiring a company called Nuance. Nuance Communications is a company that takes technology and brings it into the patient care room, where you can listen to the interactions between a doctor and a patient and automatically transcribe the conversations so a doctor can pay attention to the patient versus typing in to their medical record system. And so across every industry, we're seeing huge shifts in what's possible using technology. I think New York is the perfect ground for really getting the most out of it.
Yeah, well, the people say that New York's most important natural resource is its talent. To your point, right? It's the talent of its people, ingenuity, entrepreneurialship of it, and if we can get more and more people trained in the tools of the 21st century, I couldn't agree with you more. New York would be on a continued path of prosperity. James, I appreciate. It's fascinating to be able to look through your lenses and hear sort of your sense as to what you think the future holds. And we appreciate your leadership at Microsoft and look forward to working with you as we recalibrate reality for a post-pandemic world.
Thank you very much, Scott. Really enjoyed it. Happy to do it anytime.
Thanks very much. Be well, be safe. That concludes this week's episode of Recalibrate Reality. As you've heard throughout this series, COVID was an accelerant, with 10 years of innovation taking place over 10 months. How we harness this innovation coming out of the pandemic will determine our success in creating a New York that is more prosperous, more equitable, and more sustainable than before. Thank you again to James Phillips at Microsoft. Thank you to the Regional Plan Association, the 92nd Street Y, and the team for making this week's episode possible. I'm Scott Rechler. See you next week.